Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I'm great. You can see it is, I'm guessing this is what, sunset, maybe?
That would be sunset, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. So where do you think I am?
Well, that looks like New England. The style of the
Really think
house,
so?
the lack of trees, the
Yeah.
fact that you've been showing pictures of New England, yes, but I don't know where in New
Yeah,
England.
the house kind of also gives it away just a little
Yes,
bit, doesn't it?
yes.
Yeah, it's a beautiful shot, isn't it? This is Duxbury, Massachusetts. I
Hmm.
promise you, starting soon, I have some beautiful pictures from around the world that are also seasonable, right? That are taken. This was taken, I think, in the last, I don't know, in the last few weeks.
Probably,
Um,
yes.
but I have some other seasonable from around the world. So we're
Looking
gonna, as
forward.
the season becomes less appealing in New England, we'll move on to other places.
Okay.
Um, so today, Deirdre, we're going to talk a little bit about the questions that I've been being asked, and I know you've been being asked pretty roundly, coming from different sources, about what in the world happened with the Trump-Zelensky meeting to talk about signing or the pre-signing ceremony. And I think we've
Right.
just given a hint of what the learning process for all of us is. The pre-signing ceremony that occurred at the White House in the Oval Office. And I got a lot of questions. I know you did too about what in the world was that all about? And how do I make sense of this? And is that part of all the change? And, people are just, they're hit by so much change that's occurring. Some of it is deliberate, as we know, that it's a deliberate strategy on the part of the new administration just to continue just pushing the change. But it's also occurring because other countries are changing. And so now this is compounding. And the question is, what in the world is going on? So, what I thought is if we could just take and see how we could abstract ourselves, which is what we do, beyond the micro actions and the going back and forth, abstract ourselves also beyond the points of view, right? The political point of view or whatever, and say, what did we observe? And how might one think about and analyze these situations? And also, then, what can we learn from it? Because that's the whole point of doing this is how do we make sure we understand what it will help us move our organizations forward? And can we learn from these things that are going on? What are the lessons we can learn? So you and I spent a lot of time on this one. So we're not surprised that a lot of people are having trouble to understand the implications of all this and the reasons for all this. So it's not surprising at all because it took us a fairly lengthy period of time to come down to some fundamental thinking about it. It is not lost on us. This is a tragic situation.
Yes.
People are losing their lives on a regular basis. There's fighting going on, there's destruction. And those of us that have been close to this kind of situation and been involved in it before, we find it abhorrent. And so that's a given. We don't like that. We don't want this. We want it to stop as fast as possible. Regardless, now we can take and abstract it and talk about the aspects. But I just want to make sure everybody is clear. How, we think this is a tragic situation, that the sooner it's over and the sooner it stops, the better.
Absolutely, Tom. And um, along those lines, also, in addition to being non-political, we're not sure we have all of the information here. We're not sure anyone has all of the information here, frankly, given all of the
On both
different
sides,
parties
right?
involved and all of the conversations we keep hearing about, plus our expectations about what other parties are thinking surrounding this whole situation. So we'll do our best here, but we may be missing a point or two. Um, Whenever you're hit by a situation that is so unstructured, that is so uncertain that you can't make sense of, the best thing to do is to go to a framework. And the framework we went to here is our basic three questions when we're assessing a situation. What am I missing? What are the motivations? And is time my friend or enemy? And I think just uttering those sentences will get people to start to understand how to approach this. So let's start with what am I missing here? Um, Now, the first thing that I'll think of as someone who's done a significant amount of strategic planning is the goals. Did anyone involved in this, any of the parties involved in it, and it goes way beyond Zelensky and President Trump, to the EU, to NATO people, that's not an overlap necessarily, to any people in other countries and so forth, others in the United States and government bureaus. Was there an alignment on goals here? Did the United States know what Ukraine wanted to accomplish here? Did Ukraine have a sense of what the United States wanted to accomplish? I think both sides could make some points, but it's my sense that there was never full understanding of what both sides wanted there. So something was missing in alignment from the very beginning. In fact, I've seen in the news commentary a statement that one of President Zelensky's main goals in this whole thing was to just keep articulating what Ukraine wanted. And he did so. He did so, certainly. But that what Ukraine wanted may not have been in alignment with what the United States was thinking. So there was probably a misalignment of communication here. The second thing is assumptions about what could happen. For example, President Zelensky wanted a guarantee of Russia's cooperation. Well, it was clear that the negotiations with Russia had not happened yet. So there could be no guarantee of specifics until those negotiations happened. And in fact, Vice President Vance made some statements about, yes, Russia would be making concessions and so forth. But that's about as far as you can go. You can't anticipate what someone else will agree to and have that as part of a written agreement. It just doesn't work that way. Another thing was how this deal would actually work. Now, this is a place where you and I, Tom, may be missing information here. I truly hope that there was information about how this would work, but that hasn't been communicated to people. We almost know the outline of the deal, but not some of the specifics, particularly about, oh, mineral rights and when ceasefires would happen and who would have responsibilities and authorities and all of those issues. Similarly, we don't know what would have to be negotiated still. And let's start with mineral rights. That seemed to be appearing fairly heavily in some of the commentary. We had no idea about how they'd be negotiated, who has the rights to them now, how would that handle into a final agreement, the final agreement being one that Russia signs off on as well, and so forth. Um, Switching gears slightly. I got a sense that, and this is from something that President Zelensky said in the open meeting, the meeting in front of the press, that he had various expectations about how to deal with the United States. And they were based on how he had been dealing with the United States previously. He made some comments in that open session about he'd been promised certain things, things that he clearly still expected, without perhaps articulating or understanding when those promises happened, what they were for, or at least demonstrating an understanding that the new administration might change certain things. It was a lack of flexibility in understanding how to deal with the situation. That's my interpretation on it. But it was very clear that President Zelensky had a decided idea of how the United States should work based on his past understandings and experiences in dealing with the US. And this is something, and I'll anticipate some of our comments coming up. This is something that we all have to be very aware of when we're dealing in negotiation with people. What do they already expect here? Then a final thing is the expectation of power. or expectations around power or projections of power, that President Zelensky seemed to assume that he had more power than President Trump and Vice President Vance thought he did. Um, I can remember President Trump saying, "You don't hold the cards," and President Zelensky responding, "Well, I'm not playing a card game." That wasn't the point, and maybe the idiom was not fully understood, but there was an imbalance of power there, and I don't think that imbalance was understood in the room. And whenever you get an imbalance of power like that, you get people with expectations or anticipations that may not be realistic. And I think both of us, Tom, will be coming back to the word realistic, whether anything here was realistic, what was really going on here going forward. So those are just some points about what my perception of what was being missed on both sides there. Just a missing of communication, a lack of clarity about it. And one could actually see this leading up to the session on Friday, in that over the course of a whole week, various news media had been reporting changes of opinions, changes of intentions, promises, unpromises, changing deal terms, and so forth. So that I don't know whether anyone was really clear on what was going to be happening. And I think both of us, Tom, who have been in so many negotiations, both had a questioning sense going into Friday. So let me now go into motivations. Some of what I've said about what am I missing addresses the question of motivations, but I'm also going to talk now about different frames of mind that the Ukrainian people, and I must say, I have a very strong admiration for the Ukrainian people in their steadfast fight over the past few years. They've just truly admirable. We have to understand, we have to remember that Ukraine and Russia have not been friends for that long. Over the course of European history, there was all of the different permutations of ownership of various aspects of land, of when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, the treatment of Stalin, which was not favorable to Ukraine, the famine and destruction of the collectivization of the farms and all of those things, the power politics between Ukraine and Russia after the breakup of the Soviet Union and so forth. So that it seemed to me that President Zelensky was coming into this negotiation with an historical frame of reference that President Trump and Vice President Vance did not have. They were talking in the present. How do we solve a problem today? While President Zelensky was talking about what Ukraine wanted in terms of all of the contention, all of the various relationships or non-relationships between Ukraine and Russia going back, what, 1,000 years? That long, the history of contention there. There was also a difference in motivations about what both sides wanted to have happen. It's my sense that President Trump was pretty darn clear about it. He wanted to stop the shooting because people were getting killed. As Vice President Vance put it, your country is being destroyed. They wanted to stop this, and they wanted some aspects of mineral rights attached to the cessation of firing. It was not clear to me, still not clear today, what President Zelensky wanted, whether he even wanted a ceasefire or whether he wanted ongoing financial support and military support, more weaponry, so he could continue to fight. A fight that, to me as an outsider, was in doubt. I'll leave it that way. Um, the outcome of such a fight would be in doubt. So I'm not even sure that there was an agreement about what would be happening on the ground in Ukraine. I have not seen anything in any news reports that suggests that there is that sort of alignment. And indeed, after Friday, and I should mention we're filming this, Tom, on Sunday. So there's been a day of negotiation with President Zelensky in the UK, talking with leaders in Europe about what will happen next. It doesn't even sound to me as if the agreement coming out of that meeting has full alignment between what Europe wants and what Ukraine wants, let alone what part Washington would play in this. And clearly the Europeans want Washington involved. So there's still a difference in motivations of the various players. I haven't even mentioned Russia's motivations at this point, even. Um, and then another point, and this is a truly important one, Tom. This is something you and I have talked about in a number of videos, and that's the point of trust. There's no trust here. I don't know if anyone that I've mentioned so far trusts anyone else in this situation at this point. It's my sense that on Friday morning, there was a sufficient amount of trust to come to a signing of an agreement, but that all evaporated very quickly. Let's also talk about the final question, and that's the time. And I'm going to tie this also to a sense of reality. In Ukraine, in terms of time, time's not on their side. Ukraine is in distress. We know this. But Ukraine still wants to keep on fighting, it seems. That seems to be what President Zelensky is happening. And one wonders how much of a realistic view is being taken of the situation here. The US clearly senses that the fighting needs to stop because of the distress of Ukraine. In other words, the US has a very short time frame here. This has to happen fairly quickly. So we have different senses of time pressure here. Ukraine probably feels, with its lack of sense of time pressure, that it can just continue stringing out conversations until it gets what it wants. But the US does not feel that same degree of time pressure. It feels a lot more time pressure. And it's shocked, I think, that the Ukraine does not have that same degree of time pressure. So all of these things that I've been talking about have created a great degree of unreality to the whole situation. And you wonder, were these people even talking about the same issues? Was it the same conversation? Was it the same thinking? And then also, how did it get so far with all of this dissension? And with that question, Tom, I'm teeing up your discussion about how to think about how to deal with this going
Yeah,
forward.
that's great, great summary. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the historic context that many, I'm sure, haven't don't remember or haven't really studied. I would say that when you look at this, uh, it's clear that um, the the administration in Washington was clear about what they believe. They believe that the I mean I I like you have a lot of sympathy for this and really understand the problem.
Yes.
I know you are a little closer to it than I am, but have a lot of empathy for that. And I hate fighting. I hate the
Yes.
war, and I hate that. One of the ways, though, when you take that aside and you put that aside for a minute, I think that you're dealing with a fairly volatile situation. I think there are leaders in the Ukraine, clearly President Zelensky appears to be this way, that is that is somewhat volatile in that he's not as predictable, I think, as many leaders might be. It's certainly understandable because a new administration's come in, and the U.S. Has been a major factor in supplying him what he needs to be able to sustain what they're doing, resisting the Russian aggression. The problem is that even when one follows the discussions, they were back and forth on whether there was going to be some kind of a deal to get to a ceasefire, right? To at least to start that discussion.
Right.
Um, I think right there, you somewhat know the answer to your question about, what are you missing? Motivation, alignment, time. it's almost like you can't sync up because you know that it's constantly changing. And so what you're dealing with, I think, when you're dealing with somebody like, you know, Secretary Rubio and the team around him, Steve Weiskopf, who's part of the negotiating team, who's supposedly a skilled negotiator, and I have no reason to think he's not. Um, I think you run into the issue of you think that things are kind of coming together, so it's time to act, right? Because you think, okay, maybe things are kind of lining. Okay, let's act.
Right.
I get that. I think though, Chris Voss, our friend Chris Voss, who's a serious, definer of methods of negotiating in very difficult situations.
Right.
Chris Voss would say, make sure when you're in these kind of situations where it's almost impossible to know what you're missing, it's almost impossible to know how badly you're misaligned on motivations. Uh, and you don't want to ever appear to be um, needing to get to an answer right away because
Right.
that hurts the process. I think this is a time for getting it done first before you do anything in public. Chris Voss would say, and something I know you and I have learned in anything like this, and this applies to us doing any kind of negotiation, make sure that whatever you want the outcome to be, make sure it is number one, executable,
Right.
and two, that you get the outcome done.
Right.
And only then can you declare victory. I think in a situation like this, I think that what we could learn from this, you and I can learn, and others can learn in building things, is to not go public with this until the deal is signed. So
Right.
you're there, you're Secretary Rubio and the rest, and you say, okay, maybe the stars are aligning. We ought to sign this thing on Friday. So let's set up the ceremony and so forth. You sign it first, and then you come out and give um, you know, um, the press conference or whatever. But I think this is violate. If I were going to make any comment, it would be this has somewhat opened up the issue to some one of the parties because you didn't sign it, but you had a press conference. One of the parties could step forward and say, wait just a minute. That was kind of what it felt like, right?
Yes.
Now, one
Very
can argue,
definitely.
you and I, Deirdre, we could argue all day long. Oh, was that fair? Or was the reaction an overreaction or what? I think that really, for us, I hate to say this, it can be interesting to analyze and to discuss. And that's a different thing to do. That's not what you and I do. We're trying to say, what can we learn from this? I think that's what you can learn.
Right.
Get the outcome done whenever you think, okay, I cannot sync all this up. There's no way. I think the stars are aligning at that moment. The planets are aligning at that very moment. Do it. And only when it is done do you now come out and make public, because then you don't open up yourself to what happened on Friday. Now, why would you do that? Because you're not sure you can trust the other side,
Right.
right? That's why. I think, we had some hints of this, Deirdre. One was when the comparison is an interesting one that you and I were talking about earlier today, and even, yesterday, the day before yesterday when we were talking about this, is the Churchill FDR comparison, where Churchill came to the United States in a very similar situation to what looking for help uh, in a not an uncommon situation. Now, there was a very different thing about the period of time, the investment, all these sorts of things. So one could say there's not a lot of commonality there, but one might say there's a bit of parallel in getting the outcome done because FDR had a lot of work to do behind the scenes and even to come up with the idea of the Lend-Lease and get it executed, not only executable, but executed, and then go forward and make it aware from people. I think that was a slightly, um, it fit more what you and I are talking about. One
Correct.
final point, and then I'm going to turn it over to you to summarize for us, Stuart. But I think it's instructive to also realize that President Biden and his team had an equally difficult time with President Zelenskyy at times, and an equally emotionally charged thing. It was not ever quite as public as this was, but he had his own difficulties. So this is not um, this is not a one-off, which is even more reason why following the Voss approach might, for us, what we can take away from this is the Voss approach may be the best approach for these kind of situations where you're dealing with these various things. Okay, I'm done.
Over to me. Okay. Um, you and I have talked about time and cadence as two factors in business. And indeed, we're probably going to do a video on just the subjects of time and cadence. One point that Voss makes in relation to time is that you take the time, as much time as you need, to make sure you understand the motivations of everyone involved. And that would be something for any listener when setting up a negotiation like this. Do not assume you understand what the motivations, what the goals, what the actions are, but take the time you have. If you can, don't be pressured into anything, but just slow things down and make sure that the back and forth gives you the information you need to proceed. In terms of time further, I got the sense, and I hinted at this earlier, that the U.S. and Ukraine were not working in the same time frames at all. Um, and that and this shows whenever you're doing any sort of negotiation like this, we have to make sure we're working in the same time frames, or else there's just a basic ground misunderstanding. I might think that I'm negotiating on something that would happen next week. You're thinking about something that will happen by next Christmas. And so you've got to make sure this is something from the very beginning, maybe even the first thing you develop an understanding around is what are the time frames? What time frame are you working in? What time frame are we working toward? And clearly there was difference in here. And along with this, the cadence was different. Clearly, President Trump had a cadence in mind for getting something signed, and President Zelenskyy did not have the cadence in mind, the same one. So, time and cadence are essential issues for making sure you get any sort of negotiation like this correct. Um, and just an overview, Tom, think about what we're talking about. Time was wrong. Cadence was wrong. Motivations were misaligned. Both sides were missing things. There was not a connection here. There were probably other people involved with their own answers to these various questions. Whenever you get a situation like this is not a situation where a deal can be made or where you can do a successful negotiation. There's too much uncertainty here. So what you have to do, or the way we work, Tom, let me put it that way, is to reduce the amount of uncertainty by asking questions, by figuring things out, by not assuming, but by working to make sure that that's all sides, not just the two people here that we've been talking about most, but everyone involved is circling around the same issue so that you can work toward a solution that's common to all. So much more to say about this situation, Tom, but maybe this is a good place to stop.
Yeah, I think the situation here is that I think this comes down to um, just anticipating, even though you know none of this stuff is aligned, and I have no doubt that Secretary Rubio and Wyckoff and all the rest knew that it wasn't aligned. I think they anticipated it was going to come together on Friday for a very short period of time. I think the thing that we don't know here, Deirdre, is it could be, and this is the thing that is in the back of my mind and also in the back of yours, because you said it before I even had a chance to tell you uh, a little bit of the inside knowledge I have about this. But it could be that someone from the outside came in at the last minute and said, do this.
Yeah.
And they listened.
Yeah.
Because how often, and I bet everyone on this call could answer this question, because I can think of at least two examples, and there are probably a good bit more. I can actually think of three now, where I had a plan to go do something. And right before I did it, I had done all the proper analysis and I knew what I was going to do. And my instincts were good. They felt good at that point.
Right.
At the very last minute, somebody interceded and said, make sure you do this, or
Right.
you really need to do it this way
Right.
because, and you say, okay. And you were influenced. And at the last minute, you kind of change things.
Right.
This situation to me not only feels like two things were happening, that convergence idea that they were trying to stage all this to get it all because it looked like the stars were aligning at least for a little bit of time.
Right.
But on top of it, I this has a feeling to me like somebody stepped in and said, try to do it this way because you're something I know that you may not know. This might work to your advantage.
Right.
It just because when you land on the ground and you start to see what happened almost immediately, and you realize it was not immediately, there was aspects to indicate something was changed over here. You realize, oh, wait a minute, I've had that. So, and we've all been through that where we've
Right.
listened to somebody and then it doesn't go the way we had thought. We thought it was actually going to be a better thing for me. Now it's worse.
Right.
But then it's hard to know because you did it, right? It's hard
Right.
to know, okay, what do I do now? And then you
Right.
may get the kind of reaction that we saw in this situation. Okay, I go to the other folks, right? And immediately try to, and then I'm very concerned about this resolving as quickly and simply as it might have if it had gone together. And that's the unfortunate part of this.
Right.
So, Deirdre, it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Tom. And this clearly will come back to
Oh,
this
yes.
subject.
Oh,
Okay.
yes, it will. We have a difficult time selecting which subject to deal with on a regular basis.
Right.
See you later.
See you later. So long.